Thank you very much, everybody, for hanging around to the end. My name is Daniel Jones. I am co-founder of a consultancy called Engineer Better. We help people with Cloud Foundry, a platform as a service. We help them technologically. We help them with the nuts and bolts of implementing things, but we also help them with the organizational change that is required to actually leverage a platform as a service. I am really good at rambling on and on and on. Right? This talk I'm very interested in. There are loads of tangents I could go off on. If you sense me doing that, throw something at me because we don't have time for it. I'm here to talk about continuous delivery on a platform. What a platform gets you that enables continuous delivery in a good way. And more importantly, for those, I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, but if you practice continuous delivery and you've got a kind of intrinsic sense that this is better, and then you go to another job and they try making you do things an old-fashioned way, you're like, no, this is awful, but you can't quite put your finger on why. There are loads of kind of intangible things about continuous delivery that make it better. That's what this talk is about, explaining some of the cognitive psychology and the neuroscience that backs up why continuous delivery works better with human beings. So why do we even need this talk? And more to the point, what is it better than? It's better than the status quo. Because when enterprises first started making software, they were looking to the larger incumbent successful enterprises that went before them. Nobody knew how to build software on a commercial scale. Like the US Navy were the people that knew most about building software with PERT charts and mathematically provable systems and stuff like that, where life and death mattered, not commercial outcomes. Okay? So people started looking at the ways that successful organizations, the precursors, had done things. The Fords, the General Electrics. The problem with these kind of companies is they're manufacturers and they were performing mass production. If you are Ford and you want to sell 1 million cars, you need to make at least 1 million of every widget that goes into that car. And you need to do it with very small margins of error. You need to make it repeatable. That is not software development. If you are writing the same bit of software 1 million times, fire someone. Make it reusable. If you're writing the same thing 3 times, that's about the tipping point. Okay, we should abstract this into a reusable component now. So we're not building 1 million identical widgets. And because we're not building 1 million identical widgets, software development is not an assembly line. Factories, Six Sigma, all these kind of things are about driving down overheads, lowering costs. Costs are tangible. The things that you are paying right now for your Atlassian stack that we're going to standardize across every team, every business unit, we can see that right now. We know exactly how much that's going to cost. And if I want to hit my targets, my smart targets and my balanced scorecard for my bonus next year, I want to lower my costs so I can look good to my manager. Great. Unfortunately, you're hamstringing your developers by forcing them to all do things in a regimented fashion. You are exchanging efficiency for effectiveness. This isn't an assembly line. We need variation to be able to do things quickly. Cost of delay, the cost of not doing stuff quickly enough is massive. I want to do a whole nother talk about that. That's one of the tangents I could go off on. But because we can't see it, we don't worry about it. It's not an assembly line. Stop worrying about efficiency so much. Worry about effectiveness instead. Why isn't it an assembly line? Why isn't it mass production? Because the world is uncertain. We're not doing the same thing over and over again because we're constantly building new things. We're constantly trying to solve new problems. Again, another talk that I want to give is all about complex adaptive systems. You're a complex adaptive system. The team you work in is a complex adaptive system. The organization you work in is a complex adaptive system. All of these things are basically chaotic systems that react to other chaotic systems. Chaotic systems cannot be predicted unless you know their start state to an infinite level of precision. We can't predict the world, we can't predict the marketplace, we can't predict the organizations, we can't predict the behavior of other humans. Stop thinking that the world is certain. So that's why we're here, that's why this talk is necessary. I'm going to frame this about some of the features that a platform like Cloud Foundry gives you. If you're building your own platform, think about whether you build your own hypervisor. Do you remember those anti-piracy adverts that you used to have to watch at the beginning of a DVD? Of, you wouldn't steal a car. I want to make a spoof one of those now of, you wouldn't build a hypervisor, so why would you build your own PaaS? Okay? So, I'm sure we're all familiar with this. A siloed organisation built into functional teams. They all have their own concerns, they all have their own line management. Problem is, if you want to deliver any business value, you need all of these people. All of these teams are on the critical path to value, and you need them to coordinate. But quite often, in organisations like this, it feels to one team like the other silos don't really care about their problems. They're on the other end of a dreaded service ticket queue. They don't respond in time. When I filled in the form wrong, I just get it bounced back. No empathy, no trying to understand my problems. Just no, go back, do it again. But why? Right? They all work for the same company. They've all got the same corporate values printed out on an A3 piece of paper at the side of the bay. They should be on the same team. They should be going in the same direction. Is there something to it? Turns out there might be. Professor David Eagleman was involved in a study that involved putting people in an fMRI scanner, a functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner, that levels activity in different areas of the brain over time, indirectly by measuring usage of oxygen. So a control group of subjects was placed into this scanner, and they were shown different videos. Either a hand being painfully injected with a syringe, or a hand being lightly dabbed with a cotton wool bud. Levels of activity in the areas of the brain associated with feeling pain and with experiencing empathy were measured. So this gave us a baseline. They then repeated the experiment, but this time asked people to identify their religious beliefs before entering the scanner. So are you a Jew? Are you an atheist? Are you a Sikh? Are you a Muslim? This time when they were shown the videos, the religious identity of the person being hurt appeared on screen with it. What did they find? When the religious identity of the person being hurt was the same as the observer showed a larger empathic response. They were more able and more willing to put themselves in the same position as the person being hurt. When the religious identity was different, there was a smaller empathic response, smaller than when there had been no labels at all. So this study showed that people care less about outgroups. So what does this mean for our enterprise? Well, it's no wonder that these different silos don't care about each other's problems. For a start, they're not even working together, right? They're not on the same team. They may not even be in the same building. They're on the end of a service ticket queue. They're not collaborating. Even if they do get to see each other's problems, they are less likely to care because they've been cut into these different in-groups, out-groups, these different teams, these different tribes. So how does a platform help with this? A platform allows a smaller problem space. By introducing abstraction, we need less broad and less deep knowledge. So what do I mean by problem space? If this is all the stuff we need to deliver business value, if this is all the stuff on the critical path, well, it adds up to a problem space that looks a bit like this. But a platform should take away a load of these concerns. They shouldn't be on the critical path. We still need people with those skills, right, to keep the platform running, all the cool stuff that Ben was talking about earlier, but they're not on the critical path for delivering apps anymore. Even things like databases, we don't need to know how to stand them up. The platform will do that for us. We just need to know how to consume them. So when you put those things together, you end up with a much smaller problem space, much fewer skills that are required in a team. And because you need fewer skills in that team, it's possible to condense all the resource you need into one product team who are looking at a business problem, trying to deliver a particular product, solve a problem. That gives them a shared identity. We're all working on the same thing, we're all experiencing the same problems. It's not my tribe and your tribe anymore, it's not self and other, we're all in this together. Once we've got that product team, if we co-locate them, then we can get extra benefits as well. In 2006, some Norwegian and Italian scientists looked to correlate productivity with human capital. So human capital being the education and experience of people working in various consultancies. They also looked to correlate productivity with social capital. So how frequently members of staff in these consultancies communicated, and with how many other people. In all three cases, social capital correlated positively with productivity. In 2 out of 3 cases, the education and experience of staff in those consultancies did not correlate with productivity at all. That social capital correlates with productivity is not a surprise, right? If you think of a business like an economic network, an economic network's value is determined by the number of nodes and the number of connections between those nodes. If this is the phone network, it's pretty rubbish, right? No one's going to pay money for that. I can only call one person. But we add more nodes, and we add more connections between those nodes, and we have a more productive network. It's exactly the same as the city effect. This is why businesses place their HQs in cities, because of the connections, the possibility for cross-pollination. So we can make our organisations more productive by increasing communications within them. If this is a phone network, then what happens if these calls drop? What happens if you can't hear people properly? It's not as good, right? So we can increase the effectiveness of the network by increasing the reliability of these communications and increasing the probability that the communication is going to be understood. When it comes to humans, there's quite a cool way of doing this. Now, when I put this slide up, this works better if I pull the face. I found this out the last time I gave this talk. You may have raised your eyebrows and you may have widened your eyes a little, okay? And if you did, it could have been because of mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are brain cells that exhibit a behaviour of firing both when a motor activity is performed and when it's perceived. They were first discovered in monkeys, where researchers were looking at the motor activity of a monkey picking up a peanut, looking at motor neurons firing, left the equipment running, went off to do a thing, researcher picks up a peanut, oh, same neurons firing. Hang on a minute, I thought that was a motor neuron. I thought that was just about physical activity. They're not proven to exist in humans. Right? Because not many people have volunteered for the invasive surgery to have the electrodes put into their brain to prove their existence. So instead we talk about the mirror system, and the mirror system has given rise to something called the mirror hypothesis, which has some quite compelling evidence. The mirror hypothesis is that when you see someone's face, for a split second your mirror system fires, causing your facial muscles to trigger, to mimic their facial expression. This then puts your brain in the same position as the person you're looking at through a phenomenon called embodied cognition. So you actually assimilate all sorts of physiological information into your decision-making process through the orbitofrontal cortex. There's a great study of a lady called Tammy Myers, who's was an engineer in the US. She had a motorcycle accident, damaged her orbitofrontal cortex. She now can't make what we would refer to as gut decisions. She finds shopping an absolutely baffling experience, right? Because out of all of the different types of yogurt on the shelf, she doesn't have an instinctive reaction of like, oh, I want the classy one, or oh, I want the one that looks cheap, or oh, I want the one with the smiling lady on. It's all just semantic information to her. So the physiological information gets fed into your brain, helps tip your decision making. Your facial expression is one of those things. An experiment that investigated this was performed in 2011, and a control group of subjects were asked to identify the facial expressions shown in photographs and identify the emotions being expressed in these photographs. That was the control group. It was then repeated with Botox users. So for those of you not into your cosmetic surgery, Botox is a highly lethal, highly potent neurotoxin, which in tiny doses is enough to paralyze muscles. So you don't use them so you don't get wrinkles. So this time the Botox users had to identify the emotions expressed in these photographs. On average, they were less able to correctly identify the emotions being expressed. Now, you could assume that that means that people that have cosmetic surgery and use Botox are some kind of sociopaths and they're disconnected from the human experience. Now, I'm not saying that. And that's also not what the research said. The research suggested that it was the mirror system being broken, right? The chain had been disconnected. Saw the faces, mirror system fired, facial muscles were disconnected, couldn't trigger, denying the brain that physiological information, therefore removing a little bit of the tipping balance in the decision-making process. So, like, we all know that narrowband communications like email and SMS and instant messenger at work and link, if you've got the misfortune to use that, are all rubbish, right? That's why we've got emojis. But did you know Like, think about it. Every time that you're communicating with someone on a difficult issue and you send them an email, you are not exploiting this ability that you have. You are not exploiting this stuff that, if you're scientifically minded, we've evolved to benefit from. It's worth thinking about. Now we've got a product team, right? So we've reduced all the stuff that we need to be on the critical path to deliver value. So we've condensed it down into a product team. They've got a shared identity, great. They're all in this together. They're sitting together. They're co-located. They understand each other's problems. They can tell when they're getting on each other's nerves because they're face to face. Great. But in the old world, it didn't look like that, okay? So in the old world, it was lots of slow communications via email and ticketing queues, and stuff took forever to get turned around. There is a high transaction cost of coordinating any work. Because the transaction cost of coordinating this work was high, we ended up bunching features together, right? I'm sure you know what this looks like. All of the quarter's stuff. Like, we get the infrastructure team to do all of the stuff for this quarter at once. Testing. It takes forever to get a test environment. It takes forever to get the testing team's time. Give them all the features. They can test them all at once. We'll develop them all at once, and then they can test them all at once. So instead of working on one feature at a time, we're working on one aspect at a time. And in a situation like this, something like load testing tends to happen at the end. And in a situation like this, I'm sure you've all experienced, something that comes at the end, like load testing, tends to fail. But why, pray tell? This is waterfall. We have a requirements document. It clearly states in chapter 12.c that we should be able to handle 1,000 requests a second. Why can the system not do this? The reason for things at the end of Gantt charts being deprioritized may well be down to the present bias. This is a well-observed psychological phenomenon that demonstrates that humans value things less when they're far away. This is why buy now, pay later sofas are a thing, right? We discount the value of things the further away they are. And the closer something is, the more important it is. This is why you are much more likely to give up your Starbucks sandwich to a starving child who you walk past in the street than you are to phone Comic Relief, powered by Armakuni and Cloud Foundry, and donate £3 for a starving child 5,000 miles away, because it's far away. Now, this is well observed. It's been shown in experiments since the 50s. What's interesting is that it looks like it's got a neurological basis. In 2010, somebody called Paul Glimcher and also Kenway Louis. Paul Glimcher has written an awesome book that's very dense, but tangent. Look at the blog post I'll link to at the end, but look up his more recent book. Performed an experiment on rhesus monkeys who were strapped in a chair, poor things, and they were given a choice over a little bit of sugar water now, or a slightly bigger bit of sugar water in a few seconds' time. And they could choose between these two options depending on where they looked. So by varying the delay and the amount of sugar water, the researchers looked at, like, how much more sugar water does it need to be worth waiting 5 seconds for, or 2 seconds for, or 10 seconds for. And they plotted out the observed preferences of these monkeys. Then what they did was inserted electrodes into these monkeys' brains. And they found specific neurons in the intraparietal area that appeared to be encoding the value of these choices. So the faster the neurons fire, the more attractive the choice. The slower they pop, the less attractive the choice. Now, when they plotted these two things together, an almost one-to-one relationship. Now, I gather that Matthew did a master's in neuroscience. I'm sure he will attest that it's very rare to find observed behaviour with such a clear one-to-one mapping with neurological activity, because the brain is a fantastically complicated organ. This is the actual graph from the research. The line in red is the observed behaviour, and the black line is the firing rate of these neurons. This means the present bias is unavoidable, right? If it's hardwired into our brains, then we can't escape it. We can try and rationalise about it, but we're always likely to succumb to it. So if it's unavoidable, how can we leverage it to our advantage rather than falling victim to it? So let's get back to our Gantt chart, and let's get back to our platform. So over here, well, it's no wonder it's not important. It's no wonder that failed, because the people that were developing the code over here, that was ages away. The people that were worrying about the networking stuff, that's someone else's problem. And it's also, months in advance. Somebody else will fix that. But we've got a platform, right? So we don't need all of this stuff anymore. That's all below the waterline. That's a given when we've got a platform. Because the platform is self-service, it makes more sense to start consolidating these things together. And because we can do everything we need to do for a whole feature when we need to do it, it makes sense to work on one feature at a time. There is an inherent self-service in PaaS. PaaS should be spelt with 2 S's. If your platform is not self-service, and God knows I've seen some enterprises who buy a very expensive PaaS and then stick it behind service ticketing queues, and request for change processes. If it's not platform as a self-service, it's platform as a shit service. Make sure that you make the second S the right one. When we can have self-service, we can work on one feature at a time, and everything that is on the critical path to delivering that feature is important now. Not in 3 months, but now. That exploits the present bias, because it's now, it's close to me, it's more important. When you've got self-service, you can work in this way. If you have to wait for people, then that's when it makes sense to start working on things in parallel. You only get this when you've got self-service ability to do what you need to do when you need to do it. So as well as exposing all of the things that you need to do, a platform like Cloud Foundry also gives you control over your environments and automation, which further help with continuous delivery. And continuous delivery can help us with technical debt in interesting ways. So there's a great book published called Scarcity, which aggregates a whole heap of research about the psychological effects of knowing that you don't have enough of something that's important to you. The original paper was in 2013 called Poverty Impedes Cognitive Function. And one of the examples that they cite in there was a study that was performed in a New Jersey mall, where they asked shoppers a reasonably simple question. They posed them this hypothetical question of, you've been involved in a car accident. Your insurance company isn't going to cover the cost of repairs to your car. How are you going to find the money for it? Respondents were separated into 2 groups according to their income, either rich or poor. But the version of the question they were asked varied in each group. Either they had to cover a $300 cost or a $3,000 cost. After answering this hypothetical question, they were then given a fluid intelligence test. This is Raven's progressive matrices. It's often used as a proxy for IQ. The objective here is to guess the next one in the pattern. For the rich people, it didn't matter whether they were asked to cover a $3,000 bill or a $300 bill. Their scores were about where you would expect them to be, given their demographics. For the poor people, if they were asked to cover a $300 bill, again, their scores were where you would expect them to be. But the poor people that were asked to cover a $3,000 bill showed an IQ drop equivalent to 13 to 14 points, just by being reminded that they didn't have enough of something that was important to them. Hypothetical exercise, genuine scarcity. So the book goes on, after discovering this effect, they performed lots of other research to explore different types of scarcity and different demographics and all these sorts of things, and looking for other effects. One of them was looking at executive control. Executive control is what the suite of functions in your brain that control self-control, so inhibiting responses from different parts of the brain, and also prospective memory, your ability to remember to do something in the future. This is a Stroop test. You've probably seen these kind of things on the telly, where the names of colours are flashed up on the screen, but they're printed in a different colour, and you have to say the name of the word rather than the colour it's printed in. That is a test of self-control, because you've got to inhibit the obvious response. Time and time again, it was found that scarcity reduces willpower and prospective memory. Scarcity can be caused by money, as we saw in the first example. It can also be caused by other things, more abstract things like loneliness. Not having enough social contact induces the scarcity effects in people. But importantly for anybody involved in software development, it can also be triggered by time. Have a think about that. Every time you remind your engineers, you committed to get this, this and this done at the end of the sprint. It's Thursday, end of sprint's tomorrow. Will it make the magic scrum bucket's end of sprint, or will we have to replan it for Monday? Every time you're reminding someone of a deadline, you are inducing the scarcity effect on them. Every time you do this, you are inhibiting their fluid intelligence. You're making them less able to solve abstract problems, which last time I checked was what software engineering was all about. But worse than that, you're also reducing their self-control at a time when you're asking them to get things done quickly, so they're going to cut corners. And even worse than that, you're inhibiting their prospective memory, so they're not going to be able to remember to patch the corners that they cut because you put them under a deadline. Fantastic, isn't that all a great idea? Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a better way? Well, thankfully there is. When you've got an automated platform, then you can practice continuous delivery. Has anyone practiced continuous delivery manually? No. Were you nodding? Or was it continuous? How continuous was it?
Continuous every time we did it.
It's an interesting definition. Yeah, you're just continually deploying stuff because it never ends, the manual process. When you've got automation, then you can push into production continuously. You can do continuous deployment. Once you've got to that golden land, then I don't need to make commitments anymore. Like, I wrote a really provocative trolling article on LinkedIn not so long ago called Scrum Makes You Dumb, right? And one of the, basically a small version of this talk. And one of the things that came out of it was nobody could answer why you make commitments at the beginning of a sprint. All the Scrum Masters, certified Scrum Masters, were telling me, oh, well, you shouldn't worry about whether something makes the end of a sprint or not. So, well, why are you making commitments at the beginning of it? What's the point of that? There was no answer, right? We don't need to make commitments if you can see how fast the team is going. Don't ask me to predict the future, right? I'm not a clairvoyant. If I was, I would either be placing bets, probably powered by OpenBet, or I'd be buying lottery tickets, right? I can't predict the future. If any of you think you can, buy me a lottery ticket. So don't hypothesize about what the future might be and think that you're really good at estimating stuff. Show people how fast you are. If you're continuously delivering, then you can see how fast my team is. I don't need to make commitments to you. But we can combine continuous delivery with two simple ideas to make this a lot more palatable to the enterprise. So if we go back to our Gantt chart, it's not really much of a Gantt chart anymore, is it? But through the power of keynotes, whoosh, we can rotate it 90 degrees. And if we assume that these things are ordered by importance, then it becomes an ordered backlog. If we are only ever working on the most important thing, we're not goofing off, right? We're not doing the tasks that we think are fun, not, oh, well, Sarah's much better at that and she's not in today, so I'm going to skip down to this task. If we always work on the thing at the top of the backlog, we're always doing the business's number one priority. If we always implement it in the simplest way, we're not over-engineering anything. We're not over-architecting something for tomorrow that might never come. We're trimming all the fat off of that task. At which point, sticking a date in a calendar, saying it needs to be done by then, is a bit like shouting at the Earth to get it to go around the sun faster. It's got a certain amount of mass, read complexity. It's got a certain velocity. I don't think I need a metaphor for that. Telling it when to get there isn't going to change the inputs into that equation. If you continuously deliver the most important thing in the simplest way, deadlines become meaningless. It's fundamental. They might be socially pressured and they might be a cultural norm, but it's still bullshit, right? Continuous delivery can help with technical debt in another way too. Oh, don't tell me when batteries run out. Oh, there we go. You may have heard of a study that I think was performed in the 70s that looked at the outcomes of parole boards in US jails. And it was found that if you had your parole hearing at the end of the day, you stood a 20% chance of success. If you had your hearing just after lunch, you stood a 65% chance of being granted parole. And for a long time, people thought this was to do with the parole boards having lunch and ingesting some glucose, digesting it, metabolizing that into lysine, which is used in the premedial frontal cortex, which is responsible for executive control. So the part of the brain that does the set of functions that involves self-control. But it turns out there might be more to it than that. In a study that was performed in 2012 and has been repeated successfully several times since, subjects were given an exhaustive Stroop test. So these words flashing up at them until they started to fail, right? They were repeatedly getting it wrong. They were then asked to gargle a drink. So spit it straight out. And then immediately they have to squeeze a hand grip exerciser for as long and as hard as they possibly can as a secondary demonstration of willpower. The interesting part is that there were two different drinks, either a sugary drink or an artificially sweetened drink. Those that had gargled sugar water did significantly better on the second willpower test. But why was that, right? It can't be because they've ingested the glucose and digested it, metabolized it into lysine. It can't be that because they gargled it and spat it straight out. The second test was straight afterwards. There is no way for them to be able to digest that sugar fast enough. The implication is that the sugar was binding to chemical receptors in the tongue, which is activating the reward matrix in the brain, the areas of the brain that make you feel rewarded and warm and fuzzy. It's this sense of reward that replenishes willpower. And I know anecdotally this makes perfect sense, right? You're having a good day, it stays a good day. You're having a crap day, and I might as well have one of these cakes because it's someone's birthday and they brought them into the office. And then, let's go to the pub for lunch. And you start realizing that you've let yourself down, and then it's like, all right, well, maybe I will have a cigarette then, or I'm going to have a curry for dinner or whatever I shouldn't do. Rewards to replenish willpower. When we're practicing continuous delivery, our rewards for our engineers become more frequent, rattling them off every day. So to tie this back to the platform, a platform enables you a smaller problem space, which means that you can have cross-functional teams. Without that smaller problem space, you're going to struggle to do this. A platform that gives you self-service allows you to work on one feature at a time without waiting. You've got to wait, it starts making sense to bunch things up. You need self-service from your platform. If you can deploy automatically into environments, spin them up, then you can practice continuous delivery, and that allows you to do the simplest thing, the most important thing, the simplest way. When you're practicing continuous delivery, you're also going to give your engineers more rewards more quickly. That's going to keep them motivated and reduce their likelihood of them succumbing to technical debt. So why is this important? You know, at the end of the day, it is almost literally the end of the day now. You know, right, so we turn up, we do our jobs, we get paid a salary, we go home, yay, hopefully we get to buy a house if we're really lucky, and it's got a nice garden, all this kind of stuff. Great. Like, software methodology, it's kind of interesting, but, you know, is this really going to change the world? When we were founding Engineer Better, Dan and I, two Dans running a company just to confuse everybody, we're trying to find what common ground we had and what we believed in. And one of the observations was that businesses are made of hard-earned money of shareholders and the easily spent time of employees. I've lost count of the number of organizations I've gone into to see someone sat staring at a monitor waiting for a thing to go red, doing absolutely bugger all. People miserable because they're sat waiting 2 weeks for a change to get made, even though they know they could do it themselves in 3 minutes. That time is easily wasted. And the problem with time is it's not measured in seconds. It's measured in heartbeats. You are spending heartbeats right now listening to me prattle on when you could be going home, drinking beer, seeing your loved ones, whatever. And I hope you don't ask for a refund because, shocker, you can't get these back. All of the time of yours I'm spending now, you're not going to get back. All of the time you spend waiting for somebody in another department to do something, you're not going to get back. But there's more to it than that. We also know that time is money, and that means that money is heartbeats. So whether you're wasting someone's time in an organisation or you're wasting the organisation's money, then you're wasting someone's heartbeats. Somebody at some point had to give up time on this planet to do something of value, to get paid, to then invest it, to go into buy some shares, that then go to a company, that then spend it on a project, that then spend it on the database team, who then spend it on Oracle so Larry can go and buy a yacht. It's all heartbeats fundamentally. Now, I'm sure that every day you probably go into work and know that things aren't right. If we know that things aren't right, it's not okay just to sit there and go, oh, well, the science says that actually continuous delivery is a much better way of working, and if we have a platform, it would be much easier for us to do. But I'm just going to sit here and wait for that ticket to get serviced in 2 weeks' time. It's not good enough. I can't get up for... That is why I was speaking to somebody earlier from OpenBet. I went to one of OpenBet's clients, who shan't be named, and was just astounded by the inefficiencies there. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I've got to go and try and do something about this, which is why I started a company. So, thank you for listening to that long rambling talk. Up there is... This was originally a much longer talk that talks about many more things, including intrinsic motivation, stuff like that. A lot more about empathy as well. It stands for brain-aligned delivery, not just the quality of the talk that I've given. But also you can search for anthropic sympathy, which was the original title for this, but was shit because no one knew what it meant. That's on YouTube. It's a 20-minute keynote, so I could have saved you all 10 minutes, really. 10 minutes worth of heartbeats and just played that. And also the provocative LinkedIn article, if you find yourself needing to fight the evil forces of Scrum, then you can do that there. But there we go.